Right, folks, welcome to our webinar today. My name is Mike Ward, and today we're covering a very interesting subject, how to cut costs and prevent SoD violations. It's not very often that I can give you a story, a presentation which will satisfy both of the masters that are trying to govern you, i.e. efficiency, cutting costs. That's what the CFO wants to hear. And preventing SoD violations, that's what your auditor wants to hear. So looking down our list of attendees today, I suspect almost all of you are IT people. Here is your ideal mix, folks. You can actually get it satisfied both sides of the camp. So the session is being recorded. You haven't been on one of our webinars before. I find that very hard to believe, but we are recording it, and you will get a link to the recording sent to you overnight tonight. And if you want a copy of the slides, just let me know. Just reply to the reminder that you'll have had just before the session today. If you've got any questions, you should know how to use GoToWebinar, but there's a chat box or a question box, and you can just type it in and we'll try and pick those up as we go along. All right, but aiming today to take about 35 minutes of your time, and let me know if you don't think it's worthwhile. I don't think you need to know any more about me. I'm an old man and I've been doing ERP systems for a very long time. But Preston, introduce yourself just in case nobody knows you.
Thanks, Mike. So my name is Preston Leftwich, and for the last 20 so years, I was a JD Edwards implementation consultant from a process perspective. So luckily for me, I've implemented almost all of the JD Edwards modules and configured security around it. And so Mike and I met 6-7 years ago working on client work together. And now I sort of provide advice and direction. I do work on the demonstration piece of this, as well as architectural questions from clients on how to help out with how security can functionally be configured to meet both the needs of your compliance as well as your end users as well. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Preston. I'm sure that raised a lot of questions that people want to ask. But one thing I did want to explain to people, we do have a webinar coming up next month on this subject. Q Software is now part of a much larger group, pulling together 7 companies. You'll see on this slide here. Those 7 companies have come together to what is now called Pathlock. So we are the JD Edwards division. None of the other companies had JD Edwards products, so that means our products will continue and be developed further. Most importantly, what it means is we've got a much more resources available to develop and take the products forward. And user lifecycle management is one of the key areas where we see development going on. So Preston's going to show you the tool for that at the moment, in a moment. But there are other things that we're bringing to the market, cross-platform segregation of duties being one of them. I'm going to touch on SoD as a key part of user provisioning. But the next stage of our developments will basically be allowing our clients to access the means to manage SoD across their platforms. So for instance, if you've got JD Edwards for your financials, perhaps you use Ariba for your purchasing, or Salesforce for your sales side, you want to be able to manage segregation of duties across all of those platforms. So that's something we'll be introducing a little bit later on this year. But that's all enough about us for today. What are we trying to achieve today? What are we trying to do? The main point is we want to show you how you can satisfy your customers and produce efficiency and satisfy your auditors. But I am going to touch on the best practice issue. Our audit director is very firm in her beliefs on best practices for user management, so I am going to touch on that, but I'm going to go through that fairly rapidly so we can get on to Preston showing you how you can actually automate your processes around user management. All right. If you've got any questions, as I said, let me know. All right. The point here is that user management involves an awful lot of people. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the point is that these people all have to be involved in the process as a whole. You might, in your organization, it might be a little bit simpler, but yes, a manager or a supervisor is going to request access, and generally speaking, you'll be passing that through a help desk of some kind of other. I was just on the phone to a very nice pair of ladies at one of our customers, talking them through how they could actually automate their processes further. They're already using the tool, but the point is to be able to, in their case, automate how the ticket comes across. The request comes across from the help desk software, and automating that is very fundamental. But you've got other people involved. The auditor, if they're not asking the questions now, certainly will be asking the questions of you in the future, which is a word that's hidden there in the middle, which is evidence. They want to know that your process works, and they want to be able to check that you're following that process. So if you haven't come across it yet, one of the things that's going to happen to you is that the auditor is going to come in and say, right, I want all of the user requests for access that you had on the 11th of April last year, and I want to see who approved them and why they approved them. All right? And obviously, if you don't have an audit trail and you don't have a process and you don't have automation, that kind of audit evidence is going to be difficult to produce. So really what we're trying to do is make all of this fairly complex setup much easier. Another way of looking at it is that it's not just new hires, it's promotions, changes, etc. Leaves of absence, somebody leaving for a period of time, perhaps termination, we're going to come back to because it's the big bugbear that we feel is very, very important, and even rehires. So you've got to take account of all of these elements in your user lifecycle management, as I would call it. It's not just provisioning new users, that's the point. Termination of users is just as important. A change is the one that gets most people. What tends to happen when if you're the kind of company where people move around a lot, that they get new responsibilities, get new roles, but the old ones never get terminated, never get taken away. And what this means is you've got scope creep in your security, and your auditor is going to be on your back. This is a very interesting slide, I think, because it comes to the core issue of how we as IT, in delivering this kind of service, user provisioning automation, what we're trying to achieve. This is a survey that the Penniman Institute did, and I think it indicates the problems very well, because the top two say it all, that the users, generally speaking, are complaining it takes too long to get the access. If we can cut down that access time from 24, 48 hours to 2 hours, we've got a very satisfied user community. It's a very good way of delivering to our user community. But secondly is that the processes involved, what I've described as something that's getting more and more complicated, and what you need to do is to automate it so that you take that burden away. I think that really what it is overall is you've got to write a policy and you've got to write a procedure, but most important of all, you've got to be able to monitor whether you're sticking to that process and procedure. The auditor is the one that's going to be making those judgments, i.e. have you actually done this? And the only way really to stay on top of it is to automate. So let me just give you 3 or 4 slides on best practice. I'm not going to go into vast detail. As I said, if you want a copy of these slides, just mail me or reply to the mail you got an hour ago to remind you to turn up on time. All right? So the key to user setup in our book is that you've got to have a standard. You've got to have a set format. I think that the format you use doesn't matter so long as it's a standard one, all right? And you agree it, you document it, and everybody sticks to it, all right? But you need to understand how your password settings are set. I.e., do you have a standard? Do you have a standard time that people should replace them? All right? And are you actually judging your user setup over which environment? Do you have different environments access from one role? So these things you need to think through and document. If the auditor hasn't asked you for that document, he's going to very shortly, so set it up and understand it. And then you need, in our view, to actually understand how you organize your users. All right? And we see it as 4 types of user. Right? There are generic normal users, but you've also got 3 other types. All right? Third parties. How do you manage third parties? You need to give them a user type that's easy to identify and preferably easy to track, but also then testing and training users. So think about your classification, think about how you set them up. All right? And you need to actually understand all the risks around this classification, the way you set up the users. The main risk to me, as far as I'm concerned, is that sharing ideas, multiple ideas, are extremely bad ideas. But most companies have a bit of it. You need to understand the risks. If there is a fraud and the fraud is committed by a shared ID, how do you actually know who did it? You've got to have clarity on who actually committed these tasks. The other side of the coin is we came across a user a few weeks ago who have different IDs onto different parts of the system, and they're making users sign in and sign out. All right? That is a painful process, which with the proper design of your user and role structure, you can get away from quite easily. All right? So the core issue is to prevent fraud. You might be thinking you're trying to satisfy an auditor, but the main issue is you're trying to stop somebody hacking into your system, somebody gaining access and going to the parts of the system they shouldn't. Right? If you're not aware of it, you've got a 1 in 2 chance in the next 2 years of somebody committing a fraud on your internal systems. All right? If you're responsible for the poor way that it's set up, it's your job that's at stake. So what we do with our users, first of all, is to define the process. All right, and here's a very simple one, which Preston is going to walk you through later on. But they can get a lot more complicated than this. All right, but the point is that the request goes into the system, and how it goes in depends on whether you want to link to your help desk. Perhaps you take a ticket from ServiceNow and automatically put this into the UAM tool, and then that request is pending. What we firmly and strongly recommend that is done on every user request before it goes into assignment is that you run an SoD check, and this can happen automatically within the system if you set it up to do so, and Preston will show you that in a moment. Why do you do that? Well, what you're trying to do is to stop scope creep. All right, stop unauthorized access, unwanted access creeping into your system. And the best way of doing that is to run an SoD check. The most obvious example of that is perhaps this is a 2nd or 3rd role for this user that's been requested because somebody's going on holiday, or there's been an extension of their responsibilities. And the issue basically is to check the net effect of the 1st role already with the user and the 2nd role together. Does it give extended access that you wouldn't want? And the final point is the approval. You've got to have somebody in the business approves it. It should never happen in IT. All right? Whether this is audit, whether this is business, this is the user's system. This is their access. We're giving them tools to approve it. All right? And IT approving it is dangerous. But I know it happens on occasions, particularly with a new setup, or perhaps things are changing in the organization. We're just discussing that with the user. Yeah, I understand that. But if that approval is wrong and there is fraud on that from that user using that role later on down the line, and you've approved it, all right, you are liable. You are in the firing line. All right, so. And the whole point of this process, as I said, is to automate it with workflow, take the red tape out of it. And the second core is that there is an audit trail of everything. All right? So everything is documented, right? Everything is approved, right, by somebody in the business. And I will mention this in passing, that what you're aiming to do is reduce the response time to the users with less effort. So aim to get an approval done within 4 hours rather than 48 hours, because the workflow is there and it will remind somebody to approve it. Making sure the approver is different from the requester. Perhaps that's obvious, but I've come across this time and time again. All right, and SoD check I've mentioned. Changing job responsibilities, right? When we talked about, I mentioned this issue of somebody having new responsibilities, a new job, all right? And yes, they might be expected to do the old job for 2 weeks in a handover period, but then those privileges need to expire. So you need to be able to put dates, expiry dates on responsibilities on roles, all right? So these are the main issues. To summarize it, what are the risks? Make sure that requester can't request their own access. Very, very important, because they can request something and approve something that is not fit. All right, so you need to make sure that's true. Secondly, that approvers must understand what they are approving. Sounds obvious, but come across it time and time again that the approver is just hitting the button. That's not the point, all right? It must explain to them on the screen through the workflow what the issue is. Is this going to create an SoD issue? All right? Is this SoD okay? All right, etc. So security administrators should not be doing this work. It should be at the functional and should be in the business. All right. Don't write the role manually. Yes, automate the process. The process comes across from the Surface desk automatically into the workflow. I'm not going to spend time on years of termination because Preston's going to do this a little bit later on. This is the one that everybody forgets. All right. The largest, we came across a user a few months ago who had 2,000 users they hadn't terminated, and their auditor was saying, you've got to get these out of here, right? And we were able with the tool to be able to do it in a couple of hours, but you should be doing it as you go along, and Preston will take you through it, right? And what this all leads to is the fact that you're trying to achieve integrity, right? You're trying not to have disabled users, and if you're enabling more access, you're trying to make sure that it has proper expiration on it, all right? Perhaps you want to look at users who haven't signed in for a number of days, all right? And issues like that. Look at the environments that are assigned to user IDs if you're working across multiple environments, which many of you are, and the expiry dates, etc. But let's move on. That's all the best practice. That took that through very rapidly, but it's something we feel very, very strongly about. The issue we need to move on to now is how do you achieve that end? Well, the point is to automate. I did a presentation at the JD Edwards user group a couple of weeks ago. You can see the photographs online on LinkedIn if you're interested in an old man making a fool of himself. But the issue that the presentation that I made was about the future, back to the future it was called. And what is the future? It's about automation. It's about cutting out of the red tape. It's about ensuring these processes are followed. And at the end of the day, yes, ticking off the box that you have an audit trail that you can interrogate in minutes to give the auditors what they want. So, and the overall issue to me is about ownership, passing ownership of this issue over to the business. We are in IT just there to provide the tools, make sure they work, provide the training, but the business has to request and approve access. We can't do that for them. But I'm going to hand it over to Preston now. I'm going to check the little box, Preston, but let me just see if I can hand you the control, which I'm having a bit of difficulty with.
No problem.
Excuse me, folks. For some reason, it's not coming up. You get the control panel come up. There we go. So, Preston, over to you, matey, and
thank you, sir.
Promote you to sharing. We're using a different GoToWebinar.
There we go.
Today, folks. So we did practice it earlier because I always say practice prevents something beginning with PPP. But there you go. We didn't quite get that practice right. Preston, over to you, mate.
Thank you, sir. Thanks everybody for joining us again. I appreciate it very much, actually. Like all things, I could sit here and talk about this for half an hour, but I will only keep you for 10 minutes or so. Conceptually, just to understand kind of how this works, the user admin manager piece is one of the three kind of components that we consider the life cycle of SoD checking, security, and compliance. The idea being that we're going to show you some integration pieces where we're going to do SoD using the Audit Manager tool. We're going to leverage that, pull it in here to the application, and use that same SoD checking here so you're consistent. So you come up with one rule, one model of consistency in your organization, or sometimes people have multiple ones, right? Foreign countries, other requirements that don't exist in one country or the other, and that you can leverage that sort of in your process and how you set things up in the system. The user admin management piece, the way it's designed is from a security perspective. What we do is we have a couple things I'll talk about quickly. The idea is we have multiple approvers, part of our new enhancement, which allows you to workflow the process of accessing and putting a request in through multiple approvers, so that if you've got departments that are hierarchically driven, you can actually put them in play, and now you have multiple people approving it, maybe back up to IT or back up to a business lead, if you will. We have activity rules, which are very similar to what you see in normal JD Edwards process flows. We're not last and first with multiple digits. We're very straightforward. Entered, passed, didn't pass, needs approval, that kind of thing. And then we also have some setup here that's I think important, which is you can actually tie into your ticketing system so that when these accesses requests come in through email, through help desk systems, you can actually set up how those tickets get assigned. And I'll explain the importance of that in a minute. You can actually prevent duplicate ticket numbers to sort of check your integrity in the system if it's a manual process. We can have email setups where notifications that happen in the admin request process happen, and those emails get sent throughout the organization and so forth. You can actually set custom batch import processes if you're using spreadsheets and so forth within the system. And then you can actually identify the segregation of duty process, which leverages the model from the admin from the actual audit manager piece that we have out there. So you can actually identify all that here and utilize it going forward. So from a configuration perspective, lots of things to go through. We help you with that setup when we help you do the install. We'll actually get that working with you and make sure that it's all kind of tight and works well together. And then the actual application itself, the role request process is a very straight process. It has very little to do with trying to be difficult and more trying to be straightforward. We've got 3 different types of requests. You can actually add a different one if you'd like, but we basically look at expiring a role, removing a role, or requesting a new role. And then from behind that, it's who's requested by, which defaults in from the user that's set up in the system. We've got an email address that'll pop in based on the user person, and then the person that you're actually doing the request for, and the role. A start date and an end date. If you've got temporary assignments in play, you leave that blank if you want to move on. The star all idea, right? Does it roll into all the other roles that are out there? Your ticket number and a comment, and that's it, folks. That's all you need to do to get a request into our system with our front end. You can actually tie this in. We have APIs designed to work with ServiceNow. You can actually tie this in and integrate it so it runs automatically. And what happens is that populates into this workbench. And this workbench then allows a couple of things to happen. One, you can see that there are notification emails here identified as being turned off because in our demo environment, I don't necessarily need emailing everybody in the company every time we do something, but these are very clear that when things change, you'll get email notifications throughout your organization. On top of that, once the request comes in, whether you enter it manually or whether you import it through the process, a couple of things can be automatically set to kick off. One of those is the SoD check. So as you look through the data here, you can see the status of the process, that the SoD check hasn't been run, that it's failed, maybe that this actual SoD check has expired, it happened too long ago, and you can actually track all of that and export this using the standard JD Edwards tool sets, because all of our applications are built using JD Edwards technology. So from the workbench, you can filter down by the request type, whether it's a remove or expire. Most people don't use provisional users, but if you're fortunate enough to have a process that's in play, we actually can segregate between standard users and provisional users. And then we can actually talk about whether the roles have activity rules set up or not in that configuration piece I spoke of a minute ago. So all of that filters down your requests, and when you get the request in the workbench, the approver person who comes in here can actually see the ones that are approved by themselves. So if you've set up to be star everything, if you're in one of those positions in the company where you're going to touch everything, you can see it all. You can see it by business unit, you can see it by roles, or you can see it by actual user ID, specifically assignment to it. So once that's designed, then you get the idea of kind of doing some of the activities that go along with it. One of them is that you can run the SoD check. And when you run the SoD check, this actually tells you very clearly that it's failed, the actual SoD check, and then now you can actually review that online very clearly here, and you can see who the user is and then where they've met or failed. So it's not just that they failed, it's which ones of these have failed. So it's very clear which process they're falling down on and how you want to manage that and how that role integration works together. That makes it very easy for you to decide that, you know what, I really don't want to approve this. I'm going to go ahead and reject it. And the rejection process itself is simply managing one of the options for process. So like I said before, it's sort of that you can only do the things that come after pending approval, and we'll just reject it and move on down the road. You can actually then identify for reporting purposes that it failed on SoD, and a note that says sent back for review. That right there gives that audit trail. All of this information is captured, all of it sits in our tables, all of it can be reported on in either standard JD Edwards pieces. You can use the data browser or our tool sets to extract that out, or you can partner with our reporting group with Reports Now, and they'll help you build these reports that we've already integrated as part of our package. If you want to hear about that, send a note to Mike. We'll get into that as well. So the actual process is here. Workbenching allows you to manage the things. You can actually modify the request, make changes to it. You can actually see approvals and see who time-stamped when that approval happened. You can even convert from that provisional user to a standard user right off the bat. So all of that Workbench manages to work out all in one place, and that's what we're trying to get, efficiency. Everything in one place. You don't have to drive through a lot of menus. You don't have to work with a lot of data pieces. And that actual work itself within that admin workbench, you also have lots of different pieces of information that you can gather. You can jump to role maintenance. You don't have to go back out and go back into the security tables and security menus within the system. You can actually jump to all of those here. And we also give you straight access to user maintenance as well. You can actually add users, create users, import batch users. All of these processes around user administration, we've consolidated. We're using the standard JD Edwards programs, and we've given you access to them as well. From an SoD perspective, as you run this process, if you need to make reporting on what's been checked and what's been balanced, you can actually run those reports from in here. Those are all pop out in PDF so that you can have a space in time stagnant document to provide proof from an auditor how you've processed, especially when they come back and say, show me on the 15th of June who was approved and who was rejected and why. Out of the box, we get into this reporting processes, and this is what Mike was mentioning earlier. We actually run a terminate employee record. This employee report will actually list out all of the people that are actually in the system that need to be terminated, if you will, and those are people that are inactive. Here's my user. That user has been inactivated using that search type X, but they still have active roles assigned to them in the system. This actual report is actually a UBE that will make those changes for you. If you flag the processing options, it will disconnect all of the pieces. If you work in the security side, you know that a JD Edwards user has the user access with the pass-through account, the database account password, the roles that are assigned to it, whether those are expired or not. All of that disconnectivity will get done with this termination report, which is what Mike was talking about before. We also give you some other reports, things people who haven't signed in for X number of days, last 90 days shows you when they signed in, people that might have left the company that you missed. The HR process didn't happen like it was supposed to. This is a nice way to keep a tight ship with user admin. And then also expired roles, right? People who have got user IDs in the system, but there's no roles assigned to them. Those are kinds of gaps in process that by themselves are hard to identify, but we've collected in sort of this working report bench for you to work with. And then lastly, on the other side is the external request. This is our external request manager. It's designed right now to work and integrate with ServiceNow. And what it gives us is it's a monitor. It runs in the background, basically what you would know as a Z file. It's our version of a Z file. And that interface table then has populated with role request data, very similar to that front end piece that we talked about a minute ago. It will actually process this automatically with that scheduler running. It's a listener. It watches the table. Something comes in. It will actually pop up and put the actual data back into our role request table. And then it will run the SoD check if you turn that on. So lots of different functionality that goes along with the user admin piece. It's integrated back to the audit manager side, so you're consistent across your organization. And it provides feedback through email and workbenches and status updates so that you can see what's going on and how it works within the system. With that, Mike, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, that was good stuff, matey. Good stuff indeed. Couple of questions here for you. Which versions of JD Edwards supported with this tool?
Well, actually, that's a great question. So with this tool set, the latest we go back is 9.0. We're up to 9.2 with our functionality, with what we're doing. We're supported on the most current release, and we've actually just released our latest upgrade to that product too. So if you're a current user, we have an option to and get some enhancements here, some additional administrative functions, as well as some multiple approvers in our system as well.
That's good. And another question here, implementation, what sort of effort, time is required to implement?
That's a great question. So standard implementation is usually just to get the product uploaded and in your system. If you have nothing yet, is a couple-hour phone call with one of our tech people. They'll get you up and installed. We'll do a post checklist for another hour or so afterwards, and then it's a configuration training process that we go through. Generally speaking, that can be anywhere from 4 to 8 hours spread over a couple of meetings. So all totaled, it's a couple of days time. If you would like to get into complicated things like multiple approvers or making changes to the activity rules and how the data gets processed, or possibly setting up SoD as well, that obviously would extend it as well. But in all sincerity, it's a 3-day process, a few hours a day could get you to the end of it. A week would be more than enough time.
Good stuff. Thank you. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Oh, that's good. Okay, folks, let's wrap this up. I said we'd do 35 minutes, and we're going to be a minute or two over, but let's do it. I wanted to show you this slide because I think that I made a statement earlier on about providing better service to our clients, and this is results here from one of our clients, that real live results of what happened when they implemented the UAM toolset. What this basically shows is that they request onto their help desk, right, in October and November before implementation of the tool. You'll see in November there's about 200 requests there, and if you just focus on the bottom grey box, that 63% of them were processed within 4 hours. All right. And after implementation on the right-hand side, everything, 97% of them were implemented within 4 hours, you know. And this is a huge benefit. If you're trying to show the value of IT to the rest of the business, it's not just about automating the process. It's also about making the customer, the end user, much happier. And that's what the workflow will do for you. What are the problems we're trying to address? Well, this is a difficult process, all right? And people struggle with it all the while. But what we're trying to do is to enforce something that the auditors are happy. All right? So we're trying to make it easier to navigate, taking the manual process out of it. All right? But most particularly, as part of this, to produce a segregation of duties check. All right? So automation, automation, automation. That's the answer of the future. What we want to do is take the tedious work out of it so that the ticket will come automatically over from something like ServiceNow and be processed. All right? Enable you to build in process that satisfies the auditors. All right? And particularly enables you to proactively check SoD automatically. It will do it for you automatically and give you an answer back, you know, in a matter of seconds. All right? Is this extra role going to give extended access, which is not going to be acceptable? But from the auditor's viewpoint, the keys are that there is an approval regime, that people are approving access in the business, and checking off these issues, i.e. does the SoD check passed okay, is everything all right? Perhaps if it hasn't, we've got to put in place some kind of mitigation, and we can, as Preston took you through, you can put that in as well. And the final thing that most people find most relief from is the hidden thing. It produces an audit trail, so every change is being added to the audit trail, so you can interrogate that and see give the auditors the information. I think that's just about all we've got for today. If you've got any further questions, as I said, push them into the chat box now, or getting any others in at the moment. So I think we'll probably shut up for today. The next webinar that we are running is on SoD checking, so it's particularly relevant. If you want to have a look at that, no, that's I've got the wrong date there. It's 22nd of July, sorry. And we're running a compliance webinar with our partner Syntax on the 25th of August. All right, so let us know if we can do any more to help you on those things. If you want to send me an email, tell me, ask me questions, or tell me that I did a terrible job today, just send me an email. I'll be pleased to hear from you. I hope that was useful. You will get a link to the recording overnight tonight when our marketing team comes back on stream. But unless we've got any more questions in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to shut down for today and say thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you found that useful. Join us soon for the next of our webinars, and you can also join us on social, have a look on YouTube, etc. All the best.